Good for you. So happy for you. Really?
Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Candace is going to do our intro today.
Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to Grand Rounds. This morning we have Tanya V. Marin, doctorate nurse practitioner, to come speak to us about the unaccompanied minor. She's provided primary and acute care for pediatric patients at the border of Texas and Mexico for more than 20 years. And in 2015, opened her own pediatric clinic in the underserved area of southern New Mexico, which is about a quarter mile from the Texas state line, 1 mile from the Mexican border. Throughout her career, Dr. Marin has taken care of immigrant children and their families, and it's become acutely aware of their struggles and has been her personal mission to serve this population. So please help me welcome Dr. Tanya V. Marin.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Indeed, today we're going to be talking about the unaccompanied minor in specific. So these are the children that are coming into the United States without a parent. And so I want to kind of take you through their process from why they start at why they make the decision to move to the actual transition, the actual travel, and once they arrive to the United States, what's happening with them. And then, so I'm going to go ahead and give you some developmental milestones and stuff that they're having to endure, whether they're going to be able to make it or not, you know, that type of thing. So we're going to go ahead and review that whole process. So, so let's go ahead and get started. Of course, I have to make sure to let everybody know that I am, that I don't have any disclosures. And don't have any financial benefit to any of these courses. All right, so the objective is going to be to review the unaccompanied refugee minor program and the unaccompanied children program, which is the same. The difference is only the age. We're going to identify the developmental and mental struggles unique to the unaccompanied minors, and we're going to identify risks and protective factors affecting mental health in unaccompanied minors. Alrighty, so why do they migrate? The first question is usually why have to go through all that? So we have to kind of look at where they're living. Usually their country of origin, and in this particular case, I'm going to emphasize a lot of the South American because that's who we are servicing in this particular area. And so in this case, there's their country, you know, it's unsafe living conditions. There's trafficking going on. There's discrimination, lack of access to education and recreational activities. There's profound poverty and hunger, abuse and violence without justice, sexual exploitation, forced labor, irregular adoption, corruption within the government agencies, and military recruitment. So these migrations are actually planned. These are family migrations that are planned carefully. So I just want to kind of emphasize here that while individual responses, and actually if I can have the next slide. Thank you. So while individual responses to trafficking events are, vary widely, sustained exposure can lead to toxic stress and the development of mental health conditions, including PTSD, depression, and anxiety, which is what we're going to be dealing a lot with these unaccompanied minors. These symptoms can present even after the minor has been removed from the violent situation. Okay, next slide, please. So the journey to the United States usually takes about 3 weeks. Most of the time, the journey is well planned and is assisted by family members or friends. Most children travel without encountering any trauma. So the idea that during their travel they're going to be, misused and mistreated is not as common. It does happen, especially for young ladies. As usual, the female sex are the ones that are going to suffer a little bit more than any of the other, counterparts. So So there's two types of scenarios. There's the first scenario, which I think is the most common, which is one or both parents move to the United States first, and then they send for the minors. So usually the time that it requires them to be separated from their family is underestimated. So the plan, it goes something like this, right? Well, parents are going to migrate, then they're going to establish work, they're going to save some money, and then they're going to pay for the transport of their children. So parents usually think that this total amount of separation is only going to be about 6 months. The reality is that it takes a lot longer than that. We're talking about 5 to 10 years. So we'll do the next slide. So the second scenario, and this is a lot less common, but usually they go ahead and send the kids up first, with the intention that the parents will follow later. These children are sent to live with their adult siblings or an aunt or an uncle. And parents can continue to work at the nation of origin and save money to transport themselves to be with their children later. Once again, they estimate that the max they're going to be separated will be a year. But the reality of it is that they end up taking longer than 10 years to reunite. So next slide. So the separation can be profound and of course can lead to emotional trauma. Research does indicate that refugee minors who are separated from their parents or caregivers are at increased risk of developing mental health conditions compared to those that are not separated. So you have a child that perhaps the parents left or they separated when the child was 3 years old. And so by the time the family gets together, the child is now 8 years old or 13 years old. So now we're talking about struggling both, with an older child or an adolescent, which comes with its own complications, right? So next slide. So once they arrive to the United States border, they're taken into custody, right? They go to the Border Patrol and they are taken into custody. They are only allowed to be there for 72 hours. They cannot be there longer than 72 hours. And so they try to process them pretty quickly so that they can then place them in shelter. So usually the children that come in unaccompanied are placed in shelters within the first 72 hours of arrival. So the unaccompanied refugee minor program serves some of the most vulnerable minors in the world. So I'm just going to read this directly because I think this is kind of their mission statement, I guess. Those who are feeling prosecution, violence, abuse, and enter the United States without a parent or a custodian. Currently, minors and youth served in the program are represented from more than 50 different nationalities. The Office of Refugee Resettlement provides foster care placement and services to unaccompanied refugee minors and other special populations of youth in the United States. And they are the ones that are bridging the child welfare experience with experience of the refugee resettlement. The program is uniquely shaped to care for minors with forced migration and traumatic experiences. So I have to say that the program is actually a very well thought out program. So I almost feel very, very proud of the fact that we're doing this for our unaccompanied minors. Go ahead and one over, next slide. So there are shelters throughout the border. This is all the way from Southern California to East Texas. There are a total of 14,000 beds available throughout the border, and most most minors that show up unaccompanied go to these shelters. So about 80% of the children that are welcome into the shelters are the unaccompanied minor. There is a 20% that are actually accompanied by their family unit, and for whatever reason had to be separated momentarily, or the situation wasn't safe for the child. So that's the only time that they'll go ahead and bring them into the shelter. So most of the time, these are the unaccompanied minors. And the ages can range from 3 years old to 17 years of age, because once they become adult, they're processed as, once they're 18, they're processed as regular adults. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the actual services that are provided by the URM program, and this includes the indirect financial support for housing, food, clothing, and other necessities. So these children walk into the shelter and they are dressed, fed. They have a clean bed to sleep on, and if they have other necessities they're taken care of. They have an intense case management service by social workers, which is what allows these children to be placed relatively fast. They do have English language training and education. There's also independent living skills development, education training vouchers. They do receive health, dental, and mental health care. There is job training and career development skills, cultural orientation, and social integration, which is very important for this process to be successful and the child to have less trauma effects related to this migration. They do allow for preservation of ethnic and religious heritage, and then they do have some safe planning. Coordination of migration assistance and family tracing and reunification, which is one of the most important processes that they do handle. All right, next slide. So the shelters are staffed with the members of the community that are members of the community that they're actually vetted and have background checked, and so they're able to come in and they're hired to work in these facilities. Part of the staff includes a medical unit, which usually includes RNs, nurse practitioners, MDs, to complete full physical exams, including infectious disease screening. This was very important during the time of COVID because they were coming in and they had to make sure that they didn't have any infection. We're able to bring them into the shelters without infecting everybody if there was an infection. So it was very important during this time to do the infection disease screening. If they require vaccines, if they require medications, anything that the child's coming in with and is needed will be provided at that time. There's also psychiatric and counselors available to provide mental health services. These include screening, individual therapy, and counseling, which is pretty intense. Most children receive counseling twice a week. Twice a week, and individually, and then once a week as a group session. So there's group counseling, psychoportric medication management, substance abuse treatment, and services for victims of torture. There's the caseworkers, which I think are the most important people to remember here, because they are the ones that get these children placed the fastest. So the caseworkers, they're the ones that are going to locate and vet placement of each child. They will vet sponsors if they're not family members, or even if they are family members, but they will vet them to make sure that they're safe to be with, and that they do home studies before placing the minor. The vetting process is very strict, and they're very careful about safety when it comes to placement of these children. There's also lawyers that are available to provide counsel depending on the minor's case. So the actual next slide. So the actual program within the shelters, they do help with the adoption of their new life and help them learn the new culture, including attending pseudo schools to help them understand what the school will be like once they are placed. If the minor is is found to have any major medical condition, say they develop diabetes type 1, or they're having severe depression, or severe PTSD, any type of mental health issues, the community is also vetted. So the community with a minor will be placed is also evaluated for available medical and mental health programs, so that there's continuity of care for the child and follow up according to what their needs are. And then they also help with finding health insurance for them according to each state and what's available for them wherever they're being placed. Next slide. So how do we, I guess one of the best ways to describe how they handle the placement of these children is they categorize them. So category 1, this is a minor that has both parents in one or both parents already in a United States city. And so these minors will be placed from the time of arrival between 3 to 4 weeks. So maybe 30 days is all they're going to be in the shelter. Category 2 minors are usually are going to be placed in an adult sibling or an uncle or a aunt that is already in the United States. And so that might take just a little longer because they want to make sure that the sponsor is vetted correctly. And so that once again can take anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks. Max will be 6 weeks. Category 3 minor has a distant relative or a family friend that is going to be their sponsor. So the connection is loose, which means that that person is going to be, must be vetted, and housing must be approved before the child is placed. So these are the ones that become a little bit more complicated, and these are going to be placed anywhere between 1 to 2 months. So even these kids are only going to be in the shelter for about 60 days, and then they moved out pretty quickly. And then you have a category 4, which are not very, next slide, which are not a lot. This is a small amount of the category 4, and these minors are coming over with no sponsor, or the sponsor is not approved, meaning they have a felony, they're living in a bad situation, so there's no way the child's going to be placed with them. The minor would then can take up to 6 months to find alternative placement. So these are the kids that are going to be there in the shelter for a little bit longer. Like I said, it's not that many, but there's still, we still have some of those. Also, being there, they're starting to see, once they're in the shelter, they're starting to see movements. Everybody else is coming in within a month already being placed, and here they are month 3, month 4, and they haven't been placed. So this is going to cause quite a bit of a disillusionment for the minor, and this is when you're going to start seeing, not feeling wanted, not feeling out of place, and so that's going to lead to much more mental health issues. If there's no sponsor available at all, just no way that we can find any placement for the child with a friend, or it's just not working out for this child, they're placed in a foster system that is specifically for immigrant children, or for the unaccompanied minor. And so the problem with this is that this foster care is to the max. They're full capacity. So there's a waiting list to get in, and if they're 17 years old, they might just stay at the shelter until they turn 18, so that they can be processed as an adult. And at that time, will have to return or be accepted into the United States. But it's at an adult level. If the child is only 13 per se, then it's important that we place them in foster care, so that they can continue to be here in the United States. Sometimes though, the disillusionment or the frustration is such that they will request to just send me back home. That's not very common, and it's very difficult to do, because you're just not going to put them on a plane and say, okay, goodbye. So now we have to find out who they're going to be arriving to? Is their family still in the location where they're coming from the nation of origin? So this is not something that is very commonly done. Maybe, I mean, one every 6 months or every year. So it's very small amount of children that actually get returned, but they still even then have to make sure that they're going back to a healthy environment, or that they have a place to go. So the category 4 minor number is very small, and about 90% of all unaccompanied minors that are placed in that come into the system are placed within 60 days. And I think that's amazing. I think that's something that we should be very proud of, because we really are helping these children quite a bit. So that's my thought on that. Next slide. So once they're placed, here comes new concerns, right? First, the trauma of the exposure and everything that's going on in their nation of origin. Then the transition, which is 3 weeks, moving from one location to another. If there's any trauma during that time, sometimes just the trauma of separation itself can be difficult during this time. And then once they're placed, the new problems they're going to be dealing with, of course, is no money, no friends, a new language, and learning how to make grades in a different way. So this is all like completely culture shock for them. They're lonely. These kids can be pretty lonely. So next slide. So risk factors that lead to mental health within these unaccompanied minors are going to include the female sex, depending on their country of origin, because some locations are not as violent as others, or not having as much difficulty just staying safe. So that will also tell you a lot about if they're going to be at risk of developing any mental health issues, exposure to violence, loss of a loved one, especially if it was witnessed, which happens more frequently than not. And then the lack of support coming from us. So once they come into the United States, if the child does not have enough support, then they're going to develop some kind of mental health issues. So the stress of conflict, migration, and assimilation can be pretty tremendous for them. And then in not having the social support or buffer from family, which is what the family usually can provide, not having that is also a big problem for children to develop, or a big risk for children to develop mental health issues. So this usually results in high post-traumatic stress syndrome, major depression disorder, generalized anxiety disorders, including self-harming. All right, next slide. Thank you. So PTSD in this case is due to trauma from home, travel, separation from family unit. The significant risk symptoms and or disorders can become chronic. So if not taken care of, this can be something that is going to follow them for a while until it's addressed. The psychopathology is more severe and more prevalent among unaccompanied minors than those that are actually accompanied by a family unit, or just to compare them with regular adolescents that are non-refugees. And then the psychotic episodes. So this is talking about the major psychotic diagnosis. Those are going to be at the same rate as any other child in the United States. So those are not increased just because of the migration. So the ones that are the most common are going to be, like I said, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. All right, and then we have the family reunification. And so now the child is back with the parents, right? Or one parent, or, the family is trying to become together again. Remember, about 5 to 10 years have lapsed since the child was with their parents. So most minors reunify in a strange new home, strange new home, with new surroundings, a new culture, and a new parent, because they don't know this parent anymore. This parent left their life when they were younger. And now we're talking about 5 years, 10 years later, where this child has been raised without those particular parents present. And so now you have a new parent you have to adjust to. And then the parents themselves, they're some difficulty relating to their children, because when they last left them, it was a toddler, lovable, huggable, egocentric and fun to play with, and now they're 8 years old, and who is he? Or 13 years old, and now he's an adolescent. So now they don't recognize the developmental processes that have taken place since they left. So that can be a little bit of a difficulty for the reunification. So when children have to face age-specific and migration-specific struggles, it's like a double disruption of child development. It's pretty bad. You can have the two things happening at the same time. And that's for a child that doesn't have the resiliency, I guess you could say, to process this. It can be pretty devastating for them. And so that can take some time to kind of help them through that process. So adolescent developmental tasks, such as negotiating relationship with parents, the demand of increased mature role, and the responsibilities, they just want to be more responsible, and why not? They all this was triggered and pushed by the experiences made by the flight or the migration. So you have older, more mature adolescents that are having to fight for to be more mature, more responsibility, I guess you could say. And so that in itself can be pretty difficult. Not allowing a child to complete their developmental process can also be pretty devastating for them, in the future as they develop different roles. So their sense of identity, to develop stable and productive peer relationships, and to adjust to new bodily and sexual feelings, and to adopt personal value system is very much affected. And hampered by this movement or this flight. And even worse so when they're coming from another culture. So, they're starting to acclimate, they're starting to understand their adolescent, tasks, and then they're moved to a different culture that sees these tasks completely different, or is asking them to process it in a different manner, so that can be also very stressful for them. So this whole new culture can be, like I said, culture shock. And then one very important process that I think a lot of people kind of don't think about, I would say, and this is something that most children will vocalize. So the parent leaves when they're young, and so who becomes their mother figure is going to be their grandmother. And so now they're 10 years later being raised by their mother figure, their grandmother, whom they love, and it's their mother. Now they're being transported with a new parent, and the grandmother, the mother figure, is now left behind. And they're not going to move, because we know that the older the family member gets, the less likely they're going to move they're going to do the migration. And so now the child has to deal with loss and bereavement, because they're not going to get to see that grandma anymore. They might be able to talk to her on the phone, but it's not going to be like it used to be. So that's another pretty intense problem with some of our unaccompanied minors is the loss and bereavement, which they experienced it when the parents left, and now they're going to re-experience it when they leave to be with their parents. So, all right, next slide. So the truth is that, yes, there is a lot of mental health issues that can develop during this whole process, but interesting enough, the resiliency is one of the protective factors that allows the children to continue and be fully functional, high functioning adults. And so this resiliency is seen most commonly in about 50% of the children that migrate that you would expect are going to have mental health issues because they were in a very violent situation. They did witness violence. All this resiliency is what helps them not have any issues. And so when that resiliency is available or present in that child, they're going to do just fine. So we're talking about 50% of children that are unaccompanied will end up having that resiliency and will move on to be okay. It's the other 50% that we are concerned about, right? So despite a high prevalence of mental health disorders among unaccompanied refugee minors, half of these children will demonstrate incredible resiliency and are capable of functioning at a high level. Despite the stressors experienced by most children, they don't report symptoms or psychopathology once they're settled. So that's how you know this resilience is kicking in, is because once they're out of that situation and they're now settled and they're getting accustomed to their new home with their new parents, and all this is starting to move forward, they're going to be fine. And that's how you know this resiliency is present. One of the things that we must remember is that child's recall of trauma is malleable, and youth significantly alter the memories of trauma, which is a protective mechanism, and it's how they're able to let it go and move on. So how can we encourage this type of the resiliency so that these children can then move forward without having any issues? And so there's actually providing social support is the most important thing, and in a stable environment will likely facilitate the resiliency of children to overcome the effects of trauma. So other well confirmed protective factors that are present. So I think we're going to go to the next slide. So besides resiliency, when you have these factors present, you're going to see success, or a child is going to be not going to have any major mental health issues. So they have good social support, high support living arrangements, contact with family members. So this is why it's so important that even when they're in the shelter, that they're calling their parents or calling whoever they left behind or calling the one they're going to be going to, so that they can still, have a center place to go where they're going to be centered. High level of control competencies is very important on the side of the child. So if the child is, being spoken to by parents and, hey, you're going to do this here, and this is what's happening here. And so they start understanding what they're walking into early on, then they're going to do just fine when they transition into the new culture. And then the most important thing is that stable environment, making sure that they're not going to continue migrating or, end up homeless or, stuff like that. So it's very important that these children have these supportive factors, protective factors. And so we can indeed influence that resiliency by providing these services, which is what the program is actually trying to accomplish. And then you have, how do we treat these unaccompanied minors? So there is not a lot of research on how to treat. So we're going to base it a lot on the trauma focused therapy. So for example, the trauma focused cognitive therapy, teaching them self-healing. And you do this by giving them a sense of belonging, that I belong with my parent, I belong with an adult, I belong to a family, and I belong in this community. So that sense of belonging is going to be very important. And then also we need to focus on the integration of that child into our community, and they need to have a sense of connection. So when we say, they're coming in from China and they're going to be living in Chinatown, it's important for them to do such a thing so that they can still feel part of their community. Eventually they will assimilate to the culture, but having that connection, see, I belong to this group and they're successful, therefore I'm going to be successful as well. So it's important to make sure that they have that connection. And then allow the child to think about their experiences in a safe environment, to speak up, to say what they had. And a lot of times you'll be surprised of how many times they'll tell you the trauma that they endured, and they tell it to you like it's a matter of fact. Because indeed, they accept life for what it is sometimes, and so those are going to be the ones that are going to have the successful transition, and the resilience is going to be kicking in, what have you. And one of the barriers to treatment, though, like in South American cultures and Latin cultures or Latinx cultures, is going to be the stigma of mental health. No, you're not depressed. You're just a little sad. You're going to get over it. No, you're not having anxiety. You're just not learning how to deal with the situation. Get over it. The stigma and then the lack of, on our part, when we as providers don't have the cultural or linguistic appropriate services to provide these patients. So we don't have the Spanish, or we're unable to relate to their culture. This can also put a barrier to treatment. So what matters is that as we're providing therapy for these children, is that we develop a trustful and supportive relationship with them, so that they can overcome the stigma that is associated with any of these mental health issues. So I think that's, next, yeah. So it's kind of the whole process, from the beginning to the end, and how it's affecting the children as they're coming through. I do have quite a bit of stories to tell you as far as how these children endure and how they grow and what they develop, and that if you like, I could share. But before I do that, I would like to know if there's any questions or anything in particular that you would like to know a little bit more about.
We do have a question. They're gonna come down to the microphone.
Okay.
We got the little flying saucer right here.
Hi, I just want to say that I loved your presentation, loved all the material that you presented. I do have a question about the continued psychiatric care after they're placed and the support that these children receive.
So we hope that once they're placed, that the family member is going to continue to do the follow-up. So if they have a severe depression and we're having to treat with medication, or they indeed just need some, good counseling for, a good 6 months, the issue is not necessarily that the community doesn't have the follow-up or the continuity of care. The issue could be the stigma. So I don't know, they're crazy. My son's going to be fine, and I'm not going to take him to counseling. But another thing also happens is that they may feel the need. Oh my God, yes, I need to have my son. I want him to go to counseling. But if I don't work, or if I miss a day of work, it can mean not paying rent. It can mean not having enough money to eat. So sometimes their mental health or their medical health is displaced so that they can go to work. So a lot of the issues that some of these children have is that their basic needs are not always met. And so once, they're sheltered and fed and clothed, then maybe we'll talk about that counseling. Maybe we'll talk about going in to see the doctor for that medication. So unfortunately, that's some of the issues that we face. Because even if they do have Medicaid or some kind of a program that will help the unaccompanied minor after they've landed, in there, once they're settled, again, if it requires a parent to have to not go to work, it's gonna be a difficult thing to continue. So this has been a lot of the experience that I have actually witnessed. So one of my personal fixes to this, because I do recognize this happens a lot, and so my hours are longer. I don't start at 8 in the morning. I usually start about 10 in the morning, and I go through 8 p.m. And that's so that after work and after school, the children will come in and get their services. And I'll be honest, the babies, ones that are born in the United States, they're the ones that use the early hours, but most of the immigrant children or children of parents that are, struggling to survive will come in the evening. And I can see them as late as, 7, 8 o'clock, and they walk in, we take care of them. But that's one of the realities of the continuity of care and the follow-up is the importance and where they stand as far as their basic needs. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I have a few questions, ma'am. Really enjoyed it. Last year, I think it was last year, we had the evacuees from Afghanistan, and so we got to experience that. And one of the realization I had is how important the other stuff that you had listed on your, like legal assistance, housing, health access. Because we're, in the audience, you've got a bunch of psychiatrists and psychiatry residents, and we often focus on the individual and usually the biological, some psychological at the individual level. But a good book that I read called Refugee Mental Health, it really outlines the other things on sort of that hierarchy of needs that end up, taking precedence. So anyway, a couple of questions that I had was, who funds the URM program? Is it UNICEF or is it the U.S. government? And any issues with family members in that category 1 through 2 and 3 and their legal status in the country, if that's a barrier for them to, coming out and claiming the child. And then similar question to the last one, what kind of health insurance do these children have when they leave? Do they have Medicaid or nothing, perhaps? Thanks.
Okay, so there's 3 questions. Let me see if I don't forget them. So number 1 is, the program is funded by the federal government. So it is because it's funded by the federal government. It's very stringent, and the funds are managed by the ORR, which is the Office of Refugee Reestablishment Office. So they are the ones that set forth how the money is going to be used, but it is definitely federally funded. Okay, so number 2 is hold on, I remember the last one, which is no, I don't remember that one. What was the second?
Status. Yeah, the legal status of the family members and it being a barrier for them to come out and claim the child.
So indeed, it can be. The legal status is only affected if they have a felony. If they don't have a felony, they have misdemeanors or what have you, then it's not going to be an issue. And if they're here illegally as well, it doesn't matter, as long as when the sponsor and the home is vetted and is safe, then they'll go ahead and allow them to stay. So they don't have to be legally here as well. So the only one that matters is that they have a felony. So they do a background check on the parent or the sponsor, and there's that, they might not allow it to happen. And it's not so common with a parent. It's going to be more with the uncle, the aunt, and the older sibling, because of course the sibling has to be an adult to be able to take custody of the child. So yeah, if there's if the legal status as far as if they're a resident or not, all that does not matter as long as they are in a safe environment. The only one is the felonies, and then if the home is unsafe, of course, because they do vet the home as well, especially if the sponsor is not a parent. And then the last question was
Health insurance, ma'am.
health insurance. Okay, so the health insurance is going to depend on the state that they're going to. Like I'm going to tell you, I'm in New Mexico, so I can honestly tell you there is an insurance called Child Medical Services, and this is a specific insurance, is like Medicaid, but it is specifically for unaccompanied minors or minors that are here illegally or don't have residency, but have a major medical diagnosis. So in this case, that would be something that the child will be tapping into for services. And then depending on once they're coming in and they're provided refugee status, they do qualify for Medicaid in some states. So it's going to depend on the state that they're going to be going to. So yes, ideally, most children should leave with some kind of insurance, or at least, an idea of where they're going to be getting it from. But there's others that, depending on the state that they're in, maybe they won't have any health insurance.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
We have another one.
Okay.
Hi, ma'am. This is Candace Passarella. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is regarding, I have a friend who is a physician at the border, and because of COVID in particular, was able to provide some like mentoring, informal counseling services via Zoom. Are there opportunities for psychiatrists throughout the country to kind of involve themselves in those kinds of services, and would that be useful?
So the reality of this program is that to be able to be part of it, you have to pass a background check. You have to make sure, because we're talking about children, unaccompanied children, right? So to be part of the program, you're hired. You have to be employed because you have to be vetted, just like anybody else walking in. So as far as like volunteering or stepping up to offer services, that's going to be more so after, once a child is actually placed. And that's where you're going to see a lot of these services being needed. And absolutely, we should step in to help those children and identify them. So I'm sure that every one of our communities has a group of, that we know that there's a group of, illegal residents there present. And so helping those shelters, helping those communities at home, I think would be the best way to provide services. Because as far as the URM program goes, it is very sealed. I mean, if they have an opening and you want to try it and you apply, then that's a different story. But as far as us volunteering, just because we want to volunteer, and of course we should, it won't be through the actual program. It'll have to be once the child is settled, and then we can help them. And there is a lot to be done about that. So my work here in my area has a lot to do, a lot more with once a patient is settled, the child is settled. And then that's the services that I provide. We do diaper drives to make sure that they, are having any needs. We do, different activities, volunteered. We encourage parents. Like I do help parents. Sometimes they don't understand what they're applying for, so they'll come in so I can help them, finish applications. So anything like that. Those are the services that I provide once they're settled. I do know the process because there are times that I'm able to do it because I'm employed by them. But for the most part, it's after they're settled that's where we need to be very much involved. So once a child is identified as having mental issues with a history of being an unaccompanied minor, the referrals that you're going to receive and all that, that's where you're going to be doing a lot of more of your work. And just recognizing what the child had just gone through. And yes, as one of the other colleagues said, that it's not just the patient or that particular patient, but it's their very holistic and surrounding support that really matters. And so being aware of that and encouraging that support by the families is very, very important.
Thank you.
Alan, I have one.
Any questions?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, ma'am. This is Simran, Dr. Batra. I really appreciate the work that URM and UC do, and it's impressive that you guys are able to place people within 60 days. It sounds like a larger problem for a lot of these minors is the 5 to 10 years of waiting time between their parents arriving or them arriving and then being reunified. Do you know of any efforts or programs that are available to assist parents or minors in the country with that reunification and speeding that those 10 years up?
You know, I don't know. I do know that the Catholic Church, and I think the Lutheran Church as well, they have processes that they actually help parents and children reunite. So the church usually helps, but I think that's the extent. I personally don't know of anybody else who's helping with that particular process. So I do know the church does, and it's through the church that we end up, providing quite a bit of funding. We do fundraisers so that we can bring those families together. So that has been my personal experience. I haven't really researched to see if there's anybody out there that's helping with this process beyond the church. So I think that is a very good idea that perhaps we need to invest in. I do agree with that.
Anybody from the chat virtually? Anybody? I think those are all of our questions, ma'am. Thank you very much for presenting and taking the time.
Absolutely. And if there's anything else that you guys have questions with, or just want to share personal experiences, please feel free to reach out. I really do believe that education is the way to help a lot of these patients, a lot of these minors, is simply to educate the people that are, contacting them, who's actually going to be part of their support. So education for me is very important. So I do appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that that we were able to meet those objectives pretty good today.
Definitely think so. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.